Don't do it, man. Mark shivered. He pulled his jacket tighter. The night air was chilly. That place is cursed. Chicken, taunted Jake. His breath made white puffs in the cold. It's just an old house. The old Victorian house loomed at the end of the street. Its windows were dark eyes. The paint peeled like scabs. It stood silent, daring them to approach. Yeah, chicken. The twins, Max and Alex, jumped out of the car. They were always ready for a dare, even a stupid one like this. The house stood on Harbinger Lane. It was a place that seemed to exist outside of time, a relic of a bygone era. The house was a looming, dark silhouette against the night sky, its windows like empty eyes staring out into the void. The moonlight cast eerie shadows on its weathered facade, making it look even more sinister. It was a street name that sent shivers down your spine. Harbinger Lane was infamous in the town, a place where even the bravest souls hesitated to tread after dark. The street was often cloaked in a thick, unnatural fog that seemed to swallow sound and light, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. The locals whispered stories about the house. Tales of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena were passed down through generations. Some said they had seen figures moving behind the windows, shadows that shouldn't be there. Others spoke of hearing disembodied voices calling out in the dead of night. Stories about a family that vanished. The Harbinger family, once the pride of the town, had disappeared without a trace one stormy night. Their fate remained a mystery, fueling the house's dark legend. The only remnants of their existence were the old portraits that still hung on the walls, their eyes following you wherever you went. Stories about strange lights and eerie sounds. Flickering lights were often seen in the windows, and strange, unearthly noises echoed through the empty halls. Some claimed to have heard the faint strains of music, as if a ghostly party were still in full swing inside. Nobody dared to go near it. The house had a reputation that kept people at bay. Even during the day, the street remained eerily quiet, as if the house's malevolent presence extended beyond its walls. Children would cross to the other side of the street, and adults would quicken their pace, eager to leave the house behind. Nobody except these four friends. They were drawn to the house by a mix of curiosity and bravado, determined to uncover its secrets. They had heard the stories all their lives, and had finally decided to see for themselves if there was any truth to the legends. The front door creaked open as if inviting them in. It was a sound that sent a chill down their spines, but they pressed on, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air inside was thick and heavy, carrying the weight of years of neglect and decay. The smell hit them first. It was a musty, rotten smell, the kind of smell that clings to your clothes and makes your stomach churn. It was as if the house itself were decaying from the inside out, its very walls rotting away, like something had died inside. Cobwebs draped everything. The furniture, once grand and opulent, was now covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. It was as if time had stopped the moment the Harbinger family vanished, leaving everything frozen in a state of decay. Dust lay thick on the floor. Every step they took stirred up clouds of it, making them cough and their eyes water. The floorboards creaked under their weight, adding to the sense of unease that hung in the air. Jake flicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing more of the house's decayed interior. It was a small comfort in the oppressive gloom, but it also made the shadows seem even darker and more menacing. The beam danced across the dusty furniture. It illuminated the remnants of a once grand home, now reduced to a shadow of its former self. The furniture, though covered in dust, still held an air of faded elegance, hinting at the house's former glory. It illuminated faded portraits on the wall. The faces in the portraits were stern and unyielding, their eyes seeming to follow the friends as they moved through the room. It was as if the house's former inhabitants were still watching, judging them for their intrusion. The people in the portraits seemed to stare back at them with accusing eyes. It was an unsettling feeling, as if the house itself were alive and aware of their presence. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, each of them feeling the weight of the house's history pressing down on them. "See, nothing to be scared of," Jake said, his voice echoing in the silence. But his bravado rang hollow in the oppressive atmosphere of the house. The silence that followed his words was deafening, as if the house were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But even he sounded a little uneasy. The house had a way of getting under your skin, making you question your own senses. Every creak and groan seemed amplified, every shadow seemed to move. The friends huddled closer together, their nerves fraying with each passing moment. They wandered through the house, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of decay lingered in every corner. Shadows danced on the walls, cast by the flickering light of their flashlights. The house seemed to be frozen in time, a relic of a bygone era. Each room was emptier and dustier than the last. The furniture, once grand and opulent, was now covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. It was as if the house had been abandoned in a hurry, with no one bothering to take anything with them. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards under their feet. They found a library with shelves full of ancient books. The books were covered in dust, their pages yellowed with age. Some of the books had strange symbols on their covers, symbols that none of them could understand. It was clear that this library had not been touched in decades, maybe even centuries. The books seemed to be filled with strange symbols, symbols that looked like they belonged to some long-forgotten language. They tried to decipher the symbols, but it was no use. The meaning of the symbols remained a mystery, adding to the eerie atmosphere of the house. They found a dining room with a table set for a meal that was never eaten. The table was covered in dust, and the food had long since decayed. It was as if the occupants of the house had vanished into thin air, leaving everything behind. The sight of the uneaten meal was both eerie and sad, a reminder of a time long past. The food had long turned to dust, but the silverware still gleamed. The contrast between the decayed food and the pristine silverware was striking. It was as if the silverware had been untouched by time, a stark reminder of the house's former glory. They couldn't help but wonder what had happened to the people who had lived here. Max stumbled upon a loose floorboard. He knelt down and pried it up, revealing a dark hole beneath. The hole was small, just big enough to fit a hand through. Max reached into the hole, his fingers brushing against something cold and metallic. He pried it up. Underneath was a dark hole. The hole seemed to go down into the depths of the house, disappearing into the darkness. Max's heart raced as he reached into the hole, his fingers closing around a small, tarnished key. A single tarnished key rested on the dirt. The key was old and rusty, but it still had a certain charm to it. Max held the key up to the light, examining it closely. There was something about the key that seemed important, something that made Max feel like it was the key to unlocking the secrets of the house. "What do you think it unlocks?" he asked, his voice hushed. The others gathered around, their eyes fixed on the key. They all felt a sense of anticipation, as if they were on the verge of discovering something incredible. The key seemed to hold the answers to all their questions, and they were determined to find out what it unlocked. They soon found out. Behind a dusty tapestry in the living room was a hidden door. The door was old and worn, but it was still sturdy. They could see a keyhole in the door, and they knew that the tarnished key would fit perfectly. Their hearts pounded with excitement as they prepared to unlock the door. And in the lock, a keyhole. The tarnished key fit perfectly. Max took a deep breath and inserted the key into the lock. The key turned with a satisfying click, and the door creaked open. They all held their breath, wondering what they would find on the other side. The door slowly swung open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the depths of the house. Their adventure was just beginning. The door creaked open. It revealed a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air grew cold, sending shivers down their spines. They could hear something whispering. It was faint but distinct. "Hello? Is anybody down there?" Jake called out. His voice shook a little. Only silence answered him. They exchanged uneasy glances. Curiosity warred with fear. In the end, curiosity won. They had come this far. They had to see what was at the bottom of the stairs. The steps were old and creaky. Each footstep echoed in the silence. The air grew colder and colder as they descended. The whispering grew louder, but they still couldn't make out the words. The stairs ended at a trapdoor. It was heavy and cold to the touch. They pushed it open with a groan, the sound echoing through the narrow stairwell. The wood was old, worn, and splintered, as if it hadn't been touched in years. The hinges creaked loudly, protesting the sudden movement after years of neglect. The air that seeped through the opening was musty and thick, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and unsettling. It revealed a large circular room below. A single flickering lantern cast long shadows on the stone walls. The room was filled with strange and disturbing objects. The light from the lantern danced across the walls, creating eerie shapes and shadows that seemed to move on their own. The stone walls were cold and damp, covered in patches of moss and mold. The air was thick with the smell of incense, mixed with the scent of something metallic and foul. It was a place that seemed to exist outside of time, untouched by the world above. There were glass jars containing unidentifiable things. There were books bound in what looked like human skin. The jars were filled with strange, murky liquids, and the contents within seemed to shift and move as if alive. The books were old and worn, their covers cracked and peeling. The sight of them sent a shiver down their spines. It was clear that this was a place of dark and forbidden knowledge, a place where secrets were kept and horrors were hidden away. There were weird symbols drawn on the floor in some kind of red liquid. The air was thick with the smell of incense and something else. The symbols were intricate and complex, forming patterns that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The red liquid glistened in the dim light, giving the impression of fresh blood. The sight of it was both mesmerizing and terrifying. It was clear that these symbols held some kind of power, a power that was both ancient and malevolent, something metallic and foul. "What is this place?" Alex whispered, his eyes darting around the room, taking in the strange and unsettling scene. The metallic objects were scattered around the room, their surfaces tarnished and covered in rust. They looked like tools or instruments, but their purpose was unclear. The sight of them filled Alex with a sense of dread. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He knew that they had stumbled upon something dangerous, something that they were not meant to see. "I don't know," Mark replied, his voice barely a whisper, "but I don't think we should be here." His eyes were wide with fear, his hands trembling. He could feel the weight of the room pressing down on him, the air thick with the scent of incense and something else, something metallic and foul. He knew that they needed to leave, but he couldn't bring himself to move. The room seemed to hold them in place, its dark secrets wrapping around them like a shroud. They stood there, frozen in fear, knowing that they had uncovered something that was never meant to be found. As they stepped into the room, the trapdoor slammed shut with a loud bang. They were plunged into darkness. Panic surged through them. They fumbled for their flashlights, their hearts pounding in their chests. "What was that?" Max cried, his voice high with fear. "The door! It's locked!" Alex yelled, shaking the trapdoor, but it wouldn't budge. Jake's flashlight flickered on. It illuminated the room in a pale, sickly light. The symbols on the floor seemed to glow. The jars on the shelves seemed to pulse with an inner light. And the air was alive with whispers. "This is bad," Mark whispered, his eyes wide with terror. "This is really bad."